now to introduce our next speaker.
Our next speaker is someone who's I've actually admired from afar for quite a while. I've spoken via Twitter and things like that. Sufian, I'm delighted to introduce you to this. So I know we've connected on via Twitter. So to give it a little bit of background, he's the director of the teaching school at Chiltern Learning Trust, a really outward-facing trust. Check out their CPD catalogue on YouTube, by the way. It's something absolutely amazing. He's got responsibility for overseeing 2 regional hubs in the southeast of England, a fellow and a board member of the Chartered College of Teaching, as well as a fellow for the Chartered Institute of Educational Awareness, an active role in numerous charitable organisations, including the incredibly successful Racial Equity Network Dinner in Luton that's held every year. That's sold out in record time, I think, this year again. But tonight, Sufian's going to present for us on nailing the interview and all of the tasks. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. Loads of people admire me. Elaine, you're not alone. But it's probably the way we want to start, really, is that self-belief and believing in yourself. So just to clarify, Elaine, how long do I have? Because I don't want to go over and give everyone enough time to get their parts.
You have 15 minutes.
Thank you. And I think self-belief is probably the most important thing before you go into an interview. Interview from the outset is a flawed process in many ways. It lends itself incredibly well to certain skill sets, extroverts perhaps enjoys certain elements. And an interview doesn't necessarily always allow you to understand and get to know the talent that's sat before you. And I think that's really important to note, because so many people I know, so many great teachers, leaders I know, I also have seen them interview and have seen that they're not necessarily shun in the interview in the way they do in the classroom or around the corridors or in a school. But it is what we have in the system. It's what we use at the moment as our key metric measure to check and assess suitability of candidates for roles. So my tips are really about visiting the school. So the application process, and Ben and Amanda have touched upon this. It was touching upon, sorry, Tom, it was touching upon the fact that you want to get to know the school and visit that school before you make your first trip in on interview, getting the very basics right, knowing what it's like getting there. I've done this error before where you Google map it at 10 in the evening and it looks like you'd be there in 32 minutes flat and it looks easy. And then no one told you that actually on the day, in the morning, between 7 and 9, and we all know this from commutes, like from my house, there's certain days, if you leave at, I don't know, 6:53, you save 20 minutes compared to if you leave at 6:57. And there's all of those little intricacies that exist in every school, in every location, where you'll get hit by traffic and so on. So getting there on time. Look sharp. Look sharp. I always tell people it's a lot easier in advising some people, especially with men. It's easier to say, right, you know what, put a suit on. If you're one of those kind of, you know, really ultra kind of guys that probably belong in Silicon Valley and you want to roll up your sleeves and wear a turtleneck jumper, that's not the occasion for it. So you're rocking up. People will measure you by how you appear, how you look, how you're dressed. And it is the custom here in the country we're in, is that there's a certain expectation around how men and women, how anyone chooses to dress for that matter. So just getting it right around how you're dressed, what you're looking like. And it sounds crazy, but I also say to people, I've got a real thing about perfume. It's one of my real things where I spend a lot of money on very high quality scents. Smelling good, because again, it's just arriving, because you've arrived and you've got yourself into a sweaty mess in that morning, and your palms are all sweaty when you make that handshake, and you wore a shirt where you can see the big patches under your armpits because you're nervous as anything. Just getting those real basics right, because it's a human versus human interaction, and people don't know what you're like, how great you are, what an exceptional leader you are. They're going to just measure you on the things that they can see or they hear. So get that right. Know your stuff. Know the school. So the know your stuff, go on the website, check out Ofsted, check on Facebook, check on Twitter, go on and find out a bit more about the character of that school. There's nothing worse than someone rocking up and it's me, all about me. And it's like, well, what effort have you made to know about these kids, this community, what's important to them, the context, the character? So know your stuff about the school and do your research. And then know your stuff in content. So one is knowing their stuff, what is them, the school. One is knowing your stuff, what is you. So you've applied for a role, understanding how that role functions in that school, in the organogram or the organizational chart, where does it sit? Understanding the responsibility it comes with, understanding what the variations of that assistant head role is, that head teacher role is, that deputy head role is in that trust or in other schools in that locality, just to get a bit of a flavor. But do your research about your role. And I always say to people, when people say, look, have you got a set of questions I can look at? I always say to people, look at about 100 or 200 questions. The reason I say that is there's a dozen lists of tests, of key, or whatever, of typical interviews, and look at all the variations, look at the random ones on Google. Why would I suggest that? Because not because you have to rehearse a response to each one, but when you've heard a question said in a certain way, if that's been processed by you before, it doesn't hit you as a surprise. And if you've read that question before, it's not going to jerk you in a way. So I remember somebody saying to me, what's your biggest mistake? And because of the way they asked that, I was thinking about all sorts of stuff in my life which I messed up. And it just threw me. It was like, right, this wasn't your typical, what can you do better? What's your weakness? This was your biggest mistake. Tell me what you messed up on in the last couple of years in your current role. Yeah. And it hit me. But actually, had I read so many different variations of questions, I would have been slightly better prepared for that. So reading tons of questions always helps. When you're answering questions, people have a different view on this. I have a view that taking a notepad isn't a bad idea with you. I tend to tell people not to have information written in front of them, because the problem is the moment you try, you've got to be like news reporter level skilled to be able to look and talk and maintain a conversation without disrupting the flow of a conversation. So my thing is have it, but there's questions that people ask. So can you tell me a time when you did X and what was the outcome of that? And what happens as humans is we hear the first part or the last part, and then we want to answer there and then. And what we don't do is note the 2 or 3 different parts to that question that existed. And I always kind of go with a lot of the questions. What was the issue when you're given an example? What was your intervention? And what was the impact? The problem is people start talking about the problem, the issue. A lot of people don't get to the state of, this is what I did about that problem. And when they say what they did, they don't say, and as a result of doing what I did, this was the impact. So listening to the question, noting down if there's 2, 3 different parts to it, and making sure that you understand it's multiple parts to it and you're responding to it. but also using aids like the 3 I's to kind of really capture your answers, to know that, right, if they're going to ask me for examples, I'm going to use a bit of a format, a bit of a framework to allow me to talk about an example. Think of examples beforehand. There's nothing more weird than thinking, you knew I was going to ask you, why have you applied for this role? Why are you shocked? Why are you surprised? You should have had that one ready to go. You know I'm going to ask you at the end about safeguarding. Tell me about safeguarding. Tell me about diversity, or the importance of equal opportunities. Some of those are like preset and you know that they're going to come up. But example of, tell me about a time that you managed someone difficult. Tell me about a time that you led something. You have those examples to hand, but don't think of those examples. My advice to people preparing for an interview is say them aloud. So I always say to anyone I'm preparing for an interview, voice note me the answers on WhatsApp. I'll listen to them while I'm driving home, and I'll voice note you back. But I want to hear it, because you think you know the answer. What you haven't done is heard your answer in the way it sounds when it's said out aloud. And that hearing yourself out aloud is really important. Some people don't like doing it. I love doing it. I love hearing myself. I love looking at myself. I'm weird like that, and I accept that, and I know that's a problem I need to work on. But some people hate hearing the sound of their own voice, and therefore what happens is the idea of recording, listening to themselves, isn't it? So you're a really passionate leader, but when it comes out as waffle. How do you stop it coming out as verbal diarrhea there and then? How do you format it in a way? And what happens if you're preparing and you're doing voice notes, and 2 days later when you listen to that voice note and you get over the cringe listening of your own voice, you think, what am I saying? I'm not making sense. I know what I wanted to say, but that's not what I said. Understanding, listening to yourself, preparing yourself. I always also ask people to watch yourself back. Importance of eye contact, importance of looking, importance of not being monotone. You can see I'm totally ADHD in every part of the way I often present. I'm constantly moving around. I struggle to sit in one place. But where are your hands? So I always say to people, right, put your hands on the front, because there's nothing weird than somebody doing their knuckles. Where are your hands? How are you sitting? How's your posture? How are you looking at all of the different people? And I do that if I was presenting in an assembly, if I presented to staff. I know I always go with an M formation in any presentation. I will look at the first person on the far right. I'll look at the back right. I'll look at the front, middle. I'll look at the back again. And then I look at the front left. I'm going to do that M format if I'm presenting repeatedly, because I want everyone to feel like that I'm looking at them, that I'm capturing them through those tasks. I want to make sure that there's tone and intonation in my answers. There's eye contact with people when I'm talking to people. The interview is about rapport building. It's about relationship building. And one of the things that people often want to really take away is, can I see myself working with that person? Can we see them here in the flesh? Will they fit in? And that really happens when you build that rapport. So when they're asking the questions, the ability to nod rather than just look absolutely shocked and blank. The ability to just nod. No one's ever not got a job because they asked for a clarification. No one has never got a job because they drank water. No one's never got a job because they asked, is it okay if you repeat that question? I always say to people, always make sure you ask for one repeat. Use it as a bit of a lifeline, because if it stumbles, you give yourself 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds to hear it out again. The onus is on them to make sure that they're clear in their answer. If their question's not clear, because if they've gone off the script, sometimes people ask questions that are not clear. Ask them, could I just ask you to clarify that? Are you asking for? Double check. And these are things that, oh, drink water. They always pour water. No one drinks water at interviews, but they pour it. Take a moment to take a little sip, to just buy yourself a moment to calm down and to get yourself. When preparing for presentations, I always say to people, before you prepare yourself for the presentation, if you're walking in a staff meeting, if you're walking in an assembly, prepare yourself by doing 30 star jumps and then starting your presentation. Not in front of them when you're practicing. Don't ever do star jumps. Don't say Sufian said do star jumps on interview. The reason I say that is get used to the increased heart rate when you start, because what happens is when you get in front of an audience, heart rate goes up, the perfect sentence you had planned, somehow your body and your brain crashes between breathing at the wrong place. The moment you breathe at the wrong place, your brain says, oh my God, this is a disaster. What am I doing? I can't even get my words out. Well, if you've kind of practiced getting there, and I always ask people, stand, take a deep breath and say, get your breathing rate right. No, you didn't get a job because you were breathing. Oh gosh, that was bad. That's harsh. Take a moment to breathe, to settle in, and then go for it. The most important things, and the nugget I'll leave you with, is research is incredibly important. Knowing them, knowing yourself, and that you know your stuff. Preparing with lots of questions is important. Preparing with audio and visual for yourself gives you a better insight in how you come across. Incredibly important. When you are going to do tasks, make sure you've practiced in front of strangers, in front of audiences. And the best possible preparation for an interview is to do more interviews with random strangers that you don't know, and let them absolutely give you brutal feedback in safe spaces with trusted people, because actually that's powerful, because you rather be torn apart by people that you trust to help you build than to have it on your first occasion when going out on an interview. So, and the last thing I leave you with is the most important thing. If you are going for an interview and you do need any help, I'm very happy to listen to the voice notes. I'm very happy to watch the videos, and I'm very happy to tear you apart in a mock trial to give you all of the best possible preparation. Thank you very much, Elaine.